Chapter 1. The night my husband told me he was keeping the house, the company, and even the right to decide where our son would live, he thought he was ending our marriage like a business deal. 2 weeks later, his mistress was standing barefoot in my kitchen, my mother-in-law was treating me like a guest in the home I built, and my own son still did not know who to believe. What Bennett never realized was that while he was busy replacing me, I was the one person in that house who understood exactly how much of his perfect life was built on lies, debt, and paper he never thought I could read. My name is Eliza Cole, and by the time he signed that divorce agreement, he was not taking everything from me. He was signing for the collapse of everything he thought was his. People love to say some women make life look easy. They say it like praise, like they are handing you flowers, when what they are really doing is erasing every invisible thing you had to carry, so everyone else could walk through the day feeling light. I am 43 years old, and until 3 months ago, I lived in a big white house in Westport, Connecticut, with black shutters, a kitchen island the size of a small boat, and framed family photos arranged so carefully on the built-ins that guests used to stop and smile before they ever made it to the dining room. From the street, my life looked polished enough to belong on the cover of a local magazine. My husband, Bennett Cole, ran a boutique real estate development company called Cedar and Stone Development. Our son Noah was 17 and in the middle of college applications. We had the kind of life people in our town liked to point to when they wanted proof that hard work paid off. What they meant was that Bennett looked good in a fitted jacket and knew how to shake hands like a man who had never once doubted his own future. What they never meant was me. I was the one who knew Noah had an orthodontist appointment on Tuesday, a college counseling meeting on Thursday, and a draft of his common application essay due Sunday night. I was the one who remembered which charity gala required black tie, which school fundraiser needed a silent auction basket, and which potential buyer was allergic to lilies, so I needed the florist to switch out the centerpieces before the open house in Fairfield. I kept the tax folders labeled by year. I handled the insurance renewals. I knew which vendor for Bennett's staging furniture could be paid on Friday without causing a problem, and which one needed a partial payment that afternoon, or they would start calling his office instead of me. I coordinated cleaning crews, photographers, caterers, escrow offices, electricians, painters, and the sweet older woman from church who baked lemon bars for donor dinners when I ran out of time. People saw Bennett cutting a ribbon in front of a renovated colonial and called him brilliant. They saw me standing 3 steps behind him in heels that hurt my feet and called me supportive. Bennett loved that word, supportive. It made my work sound weightless. When I met him, I was 26 and working as a legal assistant for a small firm in Stamford that handled a lot of property transactions. I was good at details, good at deadlines, good at noticing what everyone else missed. Bennett was 32, then sharp, handsome, in a way that photographs well and full of easy confidence. He talked like the future had already agreed to his terms. The first time he asked me out, he leaned against the reception desk after dropping off a stack of closing documents and told me I had the kind of face people trusted. At the time, I thought it was charming. Years later, I understood that Bennett had always been very good at identifying useful qualities in other people. The early years of our marriage looked happy because in many ways they were. Or maybe they were busy enough to resemble happiness. We bought a smaller house first, fixed it up, sold it, moved up. Then another. Then the bigger one in Westport once Cedar and Stone started getting enough attention that Bennett needed a home that matched his story. Every step of that ladder had my fingerprints on it, even if my name was never the one anyone remembered. I picked the finishes buyers fell in love with. I calmed contractors when Bennett overpromised. I drafted client dinner seating charts that kept investors away from people they hated and next to people they might impress. I handled the domestic side of our lives so cleanly that Bennett got to move through it like a man untouched by clutter appointments or consequence. There were evenings when our house was full of people from the school board, local business owners, two couples from church, and a hedge fund wife who always acted like she was slumming it in Connecticut on weekends. I would be in the kitchen, checking on the roast, texting the babysitter about Noah's curfew, reminding the caterer that one guest was gluten-free, while Bennett stood near the fireplace with a drink in his hand, laughing like all of it had simply risen around him out of admiration. He liked introducing me to people. He always did it the same way. "This is Eliza. She makes all of this look effortless." Everyone smiled at me, and I smiled back, and no one heard the insult hidden inside the compliment. His mother heard it, though. Evelyn Cole heard everything. Evelyn was never the kind of mother-in-law who screamed or slammed cabinet doors. She was educated, polished, active at church, and very careful with her tone. That made her cruelty harder to challenge. She could wound you in a full sentence and leave no fingerprints on the knife. She used to stand in my kitchen with one hand wrapped around a coffee cup and say things like a man with real drive needs peace at home, or Bennett has always been destined for bigger things, and those kinds of men need women who understand pressure. Once, after a school fundraiser that I had spent 2 weeks planning, she watched Bennett shaking hands in a navy blazer while I carried centerpieces out to my car and said, not unkindly on the surface, "You are lucky to be standing so close to something this promising." I remember smiling as if she had said something nice. I was younger then. I still believed time revealed effort. I still believed people eventually noticed who kept the walls from cracking. Noah grew up in the middle of that polished performance. He loved us both, and I think that is important to say plainly. He was not a difficult son, not spoiled, not cold. He was just a boy raised inside a house where his father was the visible provider and his mother was the heir. Necessary everywhere and easy not to think about, because she never failed. Bennett took him to basketball games and promised him college tours and talked to him about ambition and leverage and making smart moves. I made dentist appointments, edited essays, sat up with him when he was sick, and remembered that he hated cilantro. One kind of love photographs better than the other. By the time Noah hit senior year, our life looked especially complete from the outside. He had good grades. Bennett's company had enough momentum to keep people impressed. The house was finally at that stage where every room looked finished. We hosted a donor dinner in October that people talked about for weeks afterward. Candles everywhere, string quartet in the living room, custom menus, a florist bill I negotiated down by $200 over text while standing in the school pickup line. That same night, when the last guest had left and I was scraping plates in the kitchen, Bennett came up behind me, kissed my cheek, and said, "You really do make all of this look easy." I stood there with gravy on my wrist and wanted for just 1 second to turn around and ask him if he even knew what all of this was. Instead, I smiled. That is how women lose years. Not in explosions, in swallowed sentences. Looking back, there had been signs. Bennett started keeping his phone face down on the counter. He came home later and later with stories that sounded polished but thin, like they had been rehearsed in the car. Once, when he bent to kiss me goodnight, I caught a trace of perfume that was too sharp and too young to belong to any room I had been in that day. A name started appearing on his screen more often than it should have. Madison. Sometimes with a message that was obviously not about budgets or paint samples, even if he dismissed it that way. There were also little blanks in conversations about money, numbers that changed slightly when repeated, a refinance he brushed off too quickly, a project delay he explained with too much confidence. I did what a lot of women do when the ground starts shifting under their feet. I noticed then, minimized, then noticed more. The night he asked for the divorce was a Thursday in late February. Noah was upstairs, half studying and half pretending not to panic about college decisions. I had just finished loading the dishwasher after dinner. Bennett walked in from his office, loosened his tie, and sat at the kitchen island, the way he did when he wanted something handled. There was no trembling in his voice, no visible guilt, just fatigue arranged to look sincere. He said, "We need to talk." I dried my hands and sat across from him. He folded them on the counter and said he did not think either of us was happy anymore. He said we had been living like business partners for years. He said there was no reason to drag things out and make this uglier than it needed to be. He said if we were smart, we could do this with dignity. I remember looking at his face and realizing he had practiced the word dignity. I did not say anything. I think he mistook that for weakness. He moved quickly after that, as if the emotional portion had been an unpleasant formality, and now we could get to the real agenda. The house should stay with him, he said, because Noah needed stability, and because frankly his image mattered in his business. Cedar and stone was obviously his. There was no point pretending otherwise. I could move out before things became too disruptive for Noah. We could work out a schedule, though. At Noah's age, he was old enough to decide where he wanted to spend his time. That was the moment it happened. Not when he said divorce. Not even when he made it sound like a board meeting. It was when he placed our son in the same category as timing logistics and real estate optics. I heard myself ask very quietly, "Are you talking about our child or a guest room?" He exhaled as if I were making things difficult. That was Bennett's gift. He could turn your pain into poor manners in under 5 seconds. "I just want this to be civilized," he said. Civilized. I looked at the man sitting across from me and understood all at once that he was no longer speaking as a husband. Maybe he had not been for a long time. He was speaking as someone inventorying a life and deciding which parts still served him. I did not cry. I did not throw a glass. I did not ask if there was someone else, even though I already knew enough to stop insulting myself with that question. I sat there and listened while he reduced 15 years of marriage into assets, optics, and scheduling. Later that night, I lay in our bed on my side of a mattress that suddenly felt staged and stared at the ceiling fan, turning in slow, lazy circles above me. The house was quiet, except for the old hum in the vents and one floorboard settling in the hallway outside. Everything around me had my touch in it. The paint colors, the sconces, the linen curtains, the photo wall by the staircase, the drawer in the mudroom with extra chargers and stamps and school forms and emergency cash. And still in a single conversation, all of my work had been renamed support, then stripped down further into inconvenience. It was not a marriage ending. It was a man deciding I had become part of the background he no longer wanted in frame. I remember placing one hand flat against the mattress and thinking with a calm that scared me, this house knows I built it, even if he never will. I did not know everything yet. Not really. I did not know how much uglier the truth was, or how many people were already standing just outside the edges of my life, waiting for permission to step in. But I knew enough to feel the first cold shift under my feet. By morning, the house I had spent years holding together had already begun the work of pushing me out. Chapter 2. Bennett did not tell me to leave our bedroom. He just started behaving as if I already had. The next afternoon, I came upstairs from switching a load of laundry and found the linen closet doors open, the guest room across the hall half aired out, and one of the spare pillows from the upstairs cabinet sitting on the bed like a decision that had made itself. My robe was folded at the foot of it. 2 of my sweaters were draped over the reading chair. Someone had placed a glass of water on the nightstand as if this were hospitality and not displacement. I stood in the doorway longer than I want to admit. Bennett came up behind me, phone in one hand, car keys in the other. "It just makes more sense for now," he said, "until we figure things out." I turned and looked at him. "For what, exactly? Sleeping arrangements or ownership?" He let out a breath through his nose, already irritated. "Eliza, please do not do this." "Do what?" "Make everything sound harsher than it has to be." That was one of his favorite tricks. If he could not deny what he was doing, he could at least accuse me of naming it too accurately. I walked past him into our bedroom, the room I had painted twice, the room where I had chosen the brass lamps and the ivory drapes and the bench at the foot of the bed, because I thought we were building a life that would last long enough to settle into itself. I pulled a week's worth of clothes from my side of the closet, my skincare, my phone charger, A notebook with Noah's counseling deadlines written on the inside cover. A slim file of personal documents I kept in the drawer under my scarves. None of it took long. That was the humiliation of it. 15 years could apparently be reduced to what fit in 2 arms. The guest room had originally been a den, then a nursery before Noah was born, then a place for relatives at Christmas, then a room no one used unless they had nowhere else to put someone. By that night, it was mine. The hurt was not about the room itself. It was what the room meant. I had gone from wife to temporary occupant in a house where every wall still held evidence of my labor. Noah noticed immediately. At dinner, he glanced from me to Bennett, then toward the hallway where my robe was no longer hanging on the bathroom hook. "Why are Mom's things in the guest room?" Bennett cut his chicken and said, "We are working through some things. It's temporary." Noah looked at me. "Is it?" I swallowed before answering. "For now, yes." He frowned. "That doesn't answer anything." Bennett set his fork down with that measured patience he used when he wanted to appear like the only adult in the room. "You do not need every detail right now." I watched something harden in Noah's face, not toward his father, toward me. "Maybe I do," he said, "because everyone's acting weird and no one's saying anything." I wanted to tell him the truth the way it existed in my body, which was not neat enough for a 17-year-old boy already trying to finish calculus homework and write a college essay about resilience or ambition or whatever the admissions consultants were telling children to package themselves as that year. I wanted to tell him that grown people could build beautiful houses around rotten beams and call it success until the floor finally gave way. I wanted to tell him there was a woman younger than me somewhere in the edges of this story, and that his father was already talking about our family like something to be divided and distributed. Instead, I said, "I'm trying to handle this the right way." He pushed his plate back. "I don't even know what the right way is because you won't tell me what's happening." Then he took his glass and went upstairs. That hurt more than the room had. Cecily started dropping by 2 or 3 times a week after that. She always arrived carrying something designed to make her presence look maternal. A bakery box, a tin of rugelach from a shop in New Canaan, cloth napkins she claimed she thought I might need for Sunday supper. She never once came empty-handed, which was part of how she got away with saying what she said. She stood in my kitchen one afternoon while I was sorting the mail into bills, school notices, and things that could wait, and watched me with an expression that wanted to pass for concern. "Bennett is under a tremendous amount of pressure," she said. I kept opening envelopes. "I'm aware. Men like him don't always know how to say what they need before things get bad." I slid a dentist reminder into Noah's folder. Men like him. She ignored that. "You have always been wonderful at the little things, Eliza, but sometimes little things become a way of hiding from bigger vision." I looked up then. Bigger vision. She gave me a soft smile, the kind that made outsiders think she was gracious. "Bennett has built something extraordinary. That kind of responsibility changes a person. A woman has to grow with it." I laughed once quietly because I did not trust myself to do more. "Grow with it? You mean disappear inside it?" Her face changed by less than an inch. "I think you have been unhappy for longer than you want to admit. That was another talent she and her son shared. They could wound you and then act puzzled when you bled." The first time I saw the girl in my kitchen, it was a Saturday afternoon in March. Rain pressed gray against the windows, and the house smelled faintly like coffee and furniture polish. I had gone upstairs to get the folder with Noah's latest transcript for a meeting later that week. When I came back down, I heard a laugh I did not recognize. She was standing barefoot by the island, wearing a cream sweater that hung loose off one shoulder, and reaching into the cabinet next to the sink for a wine glass. Not searching, not guessing, reaching. That was the part that lodged in me. You do not find the right cabinet in someone else's kitchen unless someone has already shown you where things belong. She turned when she heard me. She could not have been more than 29, maybe 30. Pretty in a polished, bright way. The kind of face that still believed life would rearrange itself around desire if she smiled at the right man long enough. She froze for half a beat, then tried on a nervous expression that was meant to read as decent. "Oh. Hi. Bennett said you were upstairs." I looked at the wine glass in her hand. That did not answer anything, so she pushed on. "We are just going over a few details for Tuesday. The donor dinner." Of course they were. She worked in marketing for Cedar and Stone. At least that was the title attached to the version of her Bennett had fed the world. I had seen her name on emails before. Madison Reed. Lots of exclamation points. Too much gratitude. The kind of bright competence men like Bennett found flattering because it made them feel like mentors and kings at the same time. I set Noah's transcript on the counter. "And you needed my kitchen for that." Before she could answer, Bennett came in from the mudroom carrying 2 garment bags. "There you are," he said to me in the tone people use when everyone should pretend there is nothing strange happening. "Madison is helping with Tuesday." Madison lowered the glass. "I can go." "No," I said, and even to my own ears my voice sounded strangely calm. "You are already here." Bennett gave me a warning look. I had seen that look across dining tables at charity events in front of contractors. It meant, "Do not make me manage you." I wanted to throw the glass she was holding. Instead, I opened the refrigerator, took out the container of chopped vegetables I had prepped that morning, and started arranging them on a tray for Noah, because somewhere in the middle of watching another woman stand in my kitchen like she had been there before, I still remembered my son hated celery and liked extra ranch. Madison spoke again, quieter this time. "I really didn't mean to make anything uncomfortable. I almost admired the sentence. It was so clean, so useful. It let her sound kind without requiring her to know what she was standing inside." "No," I said. "I'm sure you didn't." That evening, Cecily arrived for dinner, as if summoned by humiliation itself. She kissed Bennett's cheek, squeezed Noah's shoulder, and looked at Madison with the pleased curiosity of a woman pretending not to approve too quickly. "Madison is lovely," she said later, while helping me carry plates into the kitchen. "So polished. She understands how to move in those circles." I set a stack of salad plates down harder than I intended. "What circles are those exactly?" "My house?" Her eyes flicked toward the dining room. "Eliza, if you insist on making every transition ugly, you will only hurt yourself." Transition. That was the word she chose for a stranger learning where I kept the glassware. Naomi came over 2 nights later with Thai takeout and a bottle of Pinot Noir. Naomi Pike had been in my life for 12 years, long enough to know how I took my coffee, long enough to know that when I said I was fine, I usually meant not now. She sat cross-legged on the edge of the guest bed while I picked at noodles from the carton and pretended food still belonged in my body. She made a face. "He had her in the house already." I looked up. I had not told her that part yet. "How did you know?" She blinked once too fast. "I mean, come on. Men like Bennett always move fast once they decide they're done." Maybe. But there was something off in the way she said it, like she had not guessed so much as confirmed. She handed me the wine. "You should not stay there much longer." That was another thing. She had become very decisive about what I should do in a way that felt less like loyalty than logistics. "I'm not leaving until I know what happens with Noah," I said. She nodded too quickly. "Right. Of course. And Bennett is saying what exactly? That the house is his." I stared at her. Again, I had not used those words. She shifted, then recovered with a too bright smile. "I just know how men like that think." Maybe she did, or maybe someone had been keeping her unusually informed. A few days later, there was a fundraising luncheon at Noah's school, one of those carefully dressed daytime events where women in cream blazers and men with expensive watches eat grilled salmon under floral centerpieces and talk about arts funding like civilization depends on paddle raises. I went because Noah was on the student media committee and because absence in a town like ours becomes its own kind of confession. The room changed when I walked in, not visibly enough for anyone to call it out, just enough for me to feel it. Hands lingered on my arm a beat too long. Smiles softened into pity. Pastor Evelyn Brooks from our church touched my shoulder and said, "I've been thinking about you," which, in our town, usually meant everyone had already decided what version of your pain made the most sense to them. Near the silent auction tables, a woman I had known for years leaned in and asked in a voice dipped in concern, "How are you holding up?" Holding up from what exactly I wanted to ask. From being replaced. From being discussed. From becoming a cautionary tale before I had even been given the courtesy of my own narrative. Instead, I said, "I'm fine." No one ever believes a woman when she says that. They only decide whether her performance is convincing enough to let them stop pretending they care. When I got home that night, the house was quiet. Bennett was out. Noah was in his room. I changed into leggings, washed my face, and went to the kitchen because I could not think anywhere else. The granite counters reflected the under-cabinet lights. The room looked magazine clean, which somehow made me angrier. I started with the mail pile because that was what I always did when life tipped. Sort, stack, label, make chaos smaller. A second home equity line statement surfaced from beneath a Pottery Barn catalog. I frowned and opened it. Then an old invoice from a subcontractor tied to a project in Darien that Bennett had told me closed clean months ago. Then a lender notice addressed to Cedar and Stone for a property I thought had already been refinanced and stabilized. I sat down slowly. For the first time since Bennett had said the word divorce, my pain shifted shape. It moved from the soft tissue of humiliation into something harder, colder, more precise. This was not just an affair. Affairs were stupid and ugly and common. This felt like rot, structural rot, the kind hidden behind fresh paint and strategic lighting. I pulled another envelope from the pile, then another. Dates, balances, names of institutions I had seen before and not liked the look of. Tiny gaps in stories Bennett had told me over the past year began lining up in my mind with mechanical clarity. Upstairs, Noah's footsteps crossed his bedroom floor. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed and an engine started. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Everything ordinary continued while something inside me went still. I looked around the kitchen I had kept spotless for years, the one where donors had praised my taste, and Cecily had corrected my place settings, and Madison had reached for a wine glass like she belonged there. Then I looked back down at the paper in my hand. I could not afford to keep asking when my husband had betrayed me. The real question was what exactly he had been hiding under this house, and how long it had been there. Chapter 3. Men like Bennett do not collapse all at once. They spend years arranging the lighting so no one notices the cracks until the ceiling comes down. The next morning I made coffee, packed Noah's lunch, and answered 2 emails from the school counseling office before I let myself touch the pile of documents again. That was the part no one tells you about betrayal. Even when your marriage is splitting open in front of you, the ordinary world keeps demanding forms, signatures, groceries, permission slips, and dinner. I waited until Bennett left for the office and Noah went upstairs to get ready for school. Then I spread everything across the kitchen island in careful rows. Loan notices, vendor invoices, statements from lenders Bennett had brushed off months earlier as routine refinancing, a tax notice for Cedar and Stone that had been tucked inside a folder marked insurance. The kind of paper trail that does not look like disaster until you put all of it in one place and realize the same urgency is showing up under different logos. I had seen pieces of this before. That was the part that made me feel stupid and sharp at the same time. A project in Darien that closed, but somehow never seemed to free up cash. A landscaping company that got told next Friday so many times I started recognizing the owner's voice before he even said his name. One of Bennett's old car payments hanging around longer than it should have even after he drove home something newer and shinier. A lender I had never heard of suddenly showing up in the mail and Bennett waving it off with a hand on his way out the door. Just a bridge thing, he had said once. Just paperwork. Just temporary. Temporary is one of those words men use when they need you to stop asking questions. I called my Uncle Alan that afternoon. Alan Whitmore was my mother's younger brother, a retired CPA who had spent 30 years untangling other people's lies in conference rooms that smelled like copier toner and burnt coffee. He lived in Wilton now with a golden retriever, a vegetable garden, and enough old tax code in his head to ruin dinner if you let him get started. I trusted him because he had never once confused reassurance with honesty. He answered on the second ring. Ellie. That was what he still called me, the version of my name from before I had become someone's wife. Are you home? A pause. I am now hearing the part of your voice that means this isn't a social call. I need you to look at something. Bring it. I drove over with a banker's box on the passenger seat and my heart beating like I was transporting evidence against myself. Alan met me in his driveway in an old navy fleece and reading glasses he had forgotten to take off. When he opened the box on his dining table, he did not start talking right away. That alone told me more than comfort would have. He read, turned pages, wrote 3 figures on a legal pad, crossed one out, kept going. I stood by the window and watched a squirrel tear through the bare edge of his yard, while my whole life sat under his hands in envelopes and statements. Finally, he leaned back and removed his glasses. He's not rich, he said. I stared at him. He's living on the weeks before all the bills start hitting at once. I sat down slowly. Alan tapped one document with the eraser of his pencil. This house has been leveraged more than once. You knew about the first refinance. Yes? You did not know about all of this. He moved to another paper. These projects are too dependent on short-term cash. He's carrying vendors longer than he should. There's tax pressure here. At least some of the business debt is tied to personal guarantees. And this lender, he said, sliding one statement toward me, this is not a lender people use when everything is healthy. I looked down at the page and felt the room go colder. So what does that mean? It means the image is cleaner than the structure. He said it the way a surgeon says a diagnosis he assumes you are strong enough to hear. I let out a breath I had been holding for months, maybe years. He kept saying things were tight because Noah's school costs had gone up, because labor had gotten more expensive, because everyone was stretched after rates changed. Alan gave me a look over the rim of his glasses. People under pressure tell the truth in pieces. What they leave out matters more. He spent the next 40 minutes doing what he did best, not lecturing, not dramatizing, just laying the bones of it on the table. The house had been leaned on harder than Bennett ever admitted. Cedar and stone was not a thriving machine, so much as a polished act held together by timing image and the hope that the next project would rescue the last one. Some of Bennett's lifestyle was being floated by leverage and delay, not profit. There was enough movement to keep the illusion alive, but not enough stability to call it safe. I thought about every candlelit dinner, every open house, every charity event where I had made our life look expensive and seamless. I had been dusting surfaces built over hollow places. Then Alan asked the question no one else had. What is still yours? I looked up. My grandmother left me money when she died. Separate account? Yes. Never put into a joint account? No. Good. What about your retirement from the law firm? I rolled it over years ago. It's separate, too. He nodded once. Keep it that way. You do not let clean money touch his sinking ship if you can help it. The words stung because they were true. I thought of my grandmother, June Hartwell, standing behind the register in her small design shop in Ridgefield when I was in college, telling me that women should always know where the good silver and the emergency money were kept. At the time, it had sounded quaint. Now it sounded like a survival manual. "What about Noah?" I asked. Alan folded his hands. "You protect what is his before Bennett starts treating his future like one more piece on the board." That sentence stayed with me. 3 days later, I met with a family law attorney in White Plains named Renee Calloway. Her office was on the 4th floor of a brick building that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. Nothing about her waiting room said comfort. No inspirational quotes, no glossy pamphlets about new beginnings. Just neutral art, 2 chairs, and the kind of silence that made you sit up straighter. Renee came out herself, black suit, dark hair pinned back, no wasted movement. "Mrs. Cole?" "Eliza." She nodded once and led me into her office. I liked her immediately for all the wrong reasons. She did not seem warm. She seemed useful. I sat down and handed her my folder. She skimmed the first pages faster than most people read a menu. "What is in your name only?" I told her. "What did you inherit and where is it now?" I told her that too. "Any joint accounts you funded substantially with separate money?" "A few household things over the years, nothing major." "Did he ever have you sign personal guarantees for business obligations?" "Not that I remember." "Not that you remember is not the same as no." I felt myself sit up. "No, I would remember that." She nodded. "Good. How old is your son?" 17. "College applications?" "Yes." "Has your husband threatened support through school decisions housing access tuition?" "Not directly. He talks about stability and logistics." "That usually means leverage." That was when I knew she understood men like Bennett. She kept going. "What matters most to him?" I almost said winning, but that was too broad. The house, the company, the image of being the one who built everything. "What vehicles are tied to the business?" I told her what I knew. "What debt is attached to the properties directly or indirectly?" I handed her Alan's notes. She read them, then looked up at me for the first time in a way that felt less like evaluation and more like recognition. "He is addicted to symbolic assets," she said. "The kind people can point to." I stared at her. She set the papers down. "If he wants the things that make him look successful, there may be a way to let him keep exactly what he insists on keeping." There was no triumph in her voice, just structure. "You're saying let him take it." "I'm saying we need to know exactly what it is before anyone uses the word let." When I got home that night, Noah was sitting at the kitchen counter with his laptop open, college brochures spread around him like a paper version of Panic. He looked up when I came in. "Dad said we might have to postpone the Michigan tour." I set my bag down. "Why?" "He said money is tight because everything is getting ugly." That almost made me laugh. Ugly. As if feelings had destabilized a balance sheet. Before I could answer, Bennett walked in from the mudroom carrying a long white shopping bag from a store in Greenwich that did not sell anything necessary. Noah looked at the bag, then at him. "I thought money was tight." Bennett barely blinked. "Business expenses and personal planning are different things." Noah frowned. "For who?" Bennett looked at me. "Not him." "Your mother is making some things more complicated than they need to be." I should have defended myself. I should have thrown every paper from Alan's dining table into the center of the kitchen and let the truth burn all at once. Instead, I said, "Finish your essay, Noah. The Common App doesn't care how dramatic your parents are." He looked at me with something new in his face. Not agreement, not yet. But not trust in his father either. Just the first fracture. Later that week, Madison showed up wearing a camel coat and talking about a weekend in Vermont as if it had slipped out by accident. "It was gorgeous," she said, while leaning over the island to look at swatches for some development event. The inn had this insane view of the mountains. Then she stopped, glanced at me, and gave the little embarrassed smile of a woman realizing too late that the story in her mouth cost someone else dignity. Bennett answered for her. "It was a work trip." Of course it was. Noah heard that too. He did not say anything. He just looked back down at his laptop and typed harder than before. Naomi kept texting, checking in, offering wine, sending hearts and sympathy and practical advice. Then one afternoon, while standing in my guest room folding sweaters into a suitcase I still had not decided whether to use, I told her over the phone that Renee thought a quick settlement might be best if I wanted peace. Naomi went very still on the other end. "So you're not going to fight him for the house?" "I don't know what I'm going to do yet." "Honey, if you can get out clean, maybe that's the move." She said it too fast. Too cleanly. And the next morning, Bennett, while tying his tie in the mirror, said without looking at me, "Dragging this out over a property you can't manage on your own would be a mistake." I had never mentioned the house to him. I stood in the doorway and watched him adjust his cufflinks. "Interesting word choice." He looked at me in the mirror. "What is?" "Manage." He smiled like he had won a point in a game I had not realized we were visibly playing yet. By then, I was done telling Naomi anything real. That weekend, I scanned every document I had, then everyone Alan told me to pull, then every email chain I could still access without tipping Bennett off. I drove a set of copies to my sister June's house in Darien and left them in a weathered blue file box under the quilt chest in her guest room. Another set went into a safe deposit box. The digital files I encrypted and stored where Bennett would never think to look, because men like him believe secrecy belongs to them by birthright. I did not feel clever. I did not feel powerful. I felt cold, clear. Awake in a way grief had not let me be before. For weeks I had thought silence was what was happening to me, something heavy and humiliating and passive. Now, for the first time, it felt like something I might be able to use. Chapter 4. People like Bennett never fall because someone shouts loudly enough to shake them. They fall when they decide the room is already theirs and start walking faster. Once I understood that, I stopped reacting in ways that made him feel strong. I stopped arguing about the house. I stopped correcting him when he called Cedar and Stone his company, as if I had not spent years making sure his investors were fed, his vendors were patient, and his open houses looked like aspiration with crown molding. I stopped flinching when his mother spoke to me like I was a tired employee who had failed a performance review. And because I stopped fighting in obvious ways, everyone around Bennett relaxed into the version of the story they preferred. He thought I was worn down. Evelyn thought I had finally accepted my place. Naomi thought I was ready to whisper my surrender into her waiting hands. That was the first time in months I felt something close to control. Bennett tested it almost immediately. One night he came home from the office, loosened his tie, and stood in the doorway of the guest room while I was sorting a stack of medical statements and school notices into folders. "I spoke to my attorney," he said. I kept a paper-clipped packet in my lap. "I assumed you would." "He agrees it makes the most sense for me to keep the house, for Noah." I looked up at him. "Of course he does." He leaned one shoulder against the frame, already halfway into the confidence of a man who mistakes silence for consent. "You don't want to drag this out, Eliza. You don't want to burn money fighting over something you can't reasonably maintain on your own." I let 3 seconds pass before I answered. "You may be right." He straightened a little, surprised by how easy that had been. "I'm not saying I'm agreeing to anything yet," I said. "I'm saying I'm tired." That pleased him even more. He stepped into the room, then glanced at the folded sweaters in the open suitcase at the foot of the bed and smiled in that careful, compassionate way men do when they want credit for mercy while they are removing your oxygen. "I want this to be clean," he said. I lowered my eyes to the papers again. "So do I." He left the room thinking he had won something. In a way, he had. He had won the right to underestimate me further. Evelyn noticed my quiet, too. She came by with a platter of blueberry scones and a silk scarf she claimed she had bought for me months ago and forgotten to give me. She sat at my kitchen table like a visiting dignitary and watched me pour coffee. "I'm glad to see you looking more sensible," she said. That sounds dangerously close to a compliment. It is one if you want it to be. I set her cup down in front of her. She took a sip, then smiled. "Bennett does not need a public spectacle right now. None of you do. If you can move through this with grace, people will remember that." People. Always the audience. Always the town. I folded a dish towel and set it beside the sink. "That's very generous of you, Evelyn, to worry about what people will remember." Her eyes cooled slightly. "You think I'm cruel because I don't indulge your emotions? I'm practical." "No," I said softly. "I think you're cruel because you dress practicality in pearls and call it wisdom." For a moment, the room went very still. Then she laughed once. "There is that old spark. I was beginning to wonder if it had gone out." She left 20 minutes later, convinced I think that I was too exhausted to be dangerous. A week after that, Noah's school held its annual spring benefit at a restored estate outside Greenwich, one of those overlit evenings where women in expensive satin pretend charity is not also competition. I almost stayed home. Then Noah texted from upstairs asking if I was still coming, and I understood what absence would look like. Not peace, defeat. So I wore a black dress I had bought 3 years earlier for a board dinner, pinned my hair back, and drove myself there. The ballroom was all candlelight and white roses and quiet money. The auction tables glowed under soft amber lighting. A jazz trio played near the bar. For the first 20 minutes, I got exactly what I expected. Sympathetic glances, hands squeezing my forearm a little too long, women lowering their voices when they said my name. Pastor Evelyn Brooks pressed my hand between both of hers and said, "You have been on my heart." I smiled because that was easier than saying how unfortunate for me that my pain has become a group prayer request. Then I saw Bennett. He was standing near the donor wall with Madison at his side, not touching her in any way rude enough to be called out, just close enough that everyone with functioning eyes understood. She wore deep green silk and a look of careful composure, like she knew she was being watched and was trying to appear worthy of the risk. Bennett bent his head to say something near her ear, and she smiled up at him with the kind of bright, private softness that belongs to people who think the hard part is already over. Evelyn was nearby, speaking to a cluster of older women from church and the school foundation board. She turned just enough to see me notice them, then gave me a look so smooth it could have been read as pity from across the room. That was the humiliation of public life in towns like ours. No one had to do anything openly. All the work could be done in posture distance and who stood beside whom. I took a champagne flute from a passing tray and forced my shoulders down. Noah came over a minute later in his dinner jacket, taller than he had been 6 months earlier, all bone and tension. "You came," he said. "Of course I did." His eyes slid past me and landed on his father and Madison. For the first time, he did not look confused. He looked embarrassed. Not for me. For him. A woman from the counseling office, Lila Hart, approached with a folder tucked under her arm and a smile that faltered when she registered the geometry of the room. "There you are, Noah. I wanted to make sure your Michigan housing deposit got handled before Monday." Noah blinked. "My what?" She looked at me, then at him. "The summer architecture immersion program. We sent the final notice to your parents last week." My chest tightened. Noah turned toward me. "I thought Dad said that was on hold." Before I could answer, Bennett was suddenly there, appearing at Noah's shoulder, with the timing of a man who had spent years controlling what entered a room. "We're reviewing some priorities," he said easily. Lila nodded too fast. "Of course, I just didn't want the deadline missed." She moved away, mortified, and Noah stared at his father. "You said there wasn't money for that." Bennett kept his smile in place because people were watching. "I said things were complicated." Madison looked at the floor. Noah's jaw tightened. "Complicated enough for that program, but not for her dress." It was such a teenage line that I almost missed how devastating it was. He had noticed. Not just the woman, the spending, the lie. "Watch your tone," Bennett said. Noah laughed once quietly, with no humor in it. "You first." Then he walked off toward the terrace doors and left the three of us standing in a triangle of polished shame. I did not chase him. I did not thank him either. I just looked at Bennett long enough for him to understand that whatever had shifted in our son, it had not happened because of anything I said. On the drive home, Naomi called. "How was the fundraiser?" "Exactly as elegant as a public execution." She gave a breathy little laugh, then dropped it. "So what are you thinking now?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Honestly, I think I just want out. Cleanly." Her voice softened, but there was a current under it now, a tiny thrill she could not fully hide. "You mean you're not going to fight him for the house?" "I don't know that I'd call it a fight. More like refusing to drown under the same roof." There was a beat of silence. "That might be smart," she said. "Take what you can keep your dignity, start over." I let her keep talking the way you let someone walk farther into a room after you realize they have no idea where the floor drops. The next morning, Bennett knocked once on the open door of the guest room while I was buttoning a blouse. "If your goal is to leave with some dignity intact," he said, "we can probably settle this faster than I expected." I turned slowly. "Interesting." "What?" "I said one sentence to Naomi in confidence 12 hours ago." His expression barely shifted, but barely was enough. "What exactly are you implying?" I smiled, and it felt like cutting silk with a razor. "Nothing. I'm too tired for implications." He looked at me for a long second, unsure if he had missed a step somewhere, then left. That was the moment Naomi stopped being a suspicion and became a fact I simply had not yet named out loud. 2 days later, Renee called me from her office. "I spoke with opposing counsel," she said. "How bad?" "Not bad. Predictable." I shut my laptop and leaned back in the guest room chair. "Meaning?" "Douglas Pritchard is not stupid. He suggested a deeper review on the business side." I went still. "And Bennett." I believe the phrase used was unnecessary overcomplication. "Of course it was," Renee continued. "Douglas asked more than once whether there should be an independent forensic look at the liabilities tied to the company and the properties. Your husband is very confident that your concerns are emotional, not informational." I closed my eyes for a second. "So Douglas knows there's risk." "Douglas knows enough to ask. That is not the same as being allowed to act on it." That mattered. It mattered because I needed Bennett's collapse to belong to him, not to a foolish lawyer, not to a magical legal trap, to his own arrogance, to his lifelong addiction to being the smartest man in the room. Later that night, Noah came into the kitchen while I was rinsing dishes. He stood there for a second with his phone in one hand and a folded printout in the other. "I was looking for my FAFSA login stuff in Dad's office." I dried my hands and turned to face him. "And?" He held up the paper. "This was on the printer." I took it from him. It was an email chain about the Michigan program deposit, the final reminder, then a forwarded response from Bennett's office address asking for an extension because of temporary liquidity constraints. Under that was a receipt confirmation from a luxury hotel in Vermont from the same week attached by mistake in the same print batch. Noah watched my face while I read. He told me that program might not happen because things were tight, he said. I folded the paper once. He shouldn't have done that. Noah gave a short, bitter laugh. That's all you're going to say? I looked at him for a long moment. He had his father's height and my eyes. Poor kid. What do you want me to say? He looked away first. I don't know. Maybe when you knew he was lying. Maybe why nobody says anything until it turns into this. There it was. Not anger exactly. The first clean break in his trust. I set the paper on the counter between us. Long enough, I said quietly. Not early enough. He looked back at me then, and whatever he saw in my face seemed to settle something inside him. He did not apologize. I did not need him to. He just nodded once, small and heavy, and took the paper back. After he went upstairs, I sat alone in the kitchen and let that moment move through me. Not victory. Something stranger. The beginning of being seen by my own child after years of being useful in ways too constant to notice. The draft from Renee came the next afternoon. I read it at the dining table with the curtains half open and late light crossing the wood in narrow gold bars. The structure was as cold as surgery, and for the first time in months, so was I. Bennett would keep nearly everything he valued as proof of his own importance: the house, the company interests, the vehicles tied to his business identity, the visible architecture of success. The obligations tied to them would follow the same path. I would leave with what was clean, what was mine, what was defensible, and enough space to get Noah through the last stretch of this year without being dragged under the same collapsing roofline. I called Renee. I've read it. And I looked out the window at the yard I had planted one tulip bed at a time. He'll sign this. Yes, she said. He will. Because he'll think he's winning. He'll think he already has. I signed at the bottom without trembling. There was no triumph in it, no flash of vindication, just the quiet, almost frightening calm of finally understanding that the hardest thing I had done was not survive the humiliation. It was staying quiet long enough for a man like Bennett to keep walking, smiling, and reaching for exactly the thing that was going to bury him. Chapter 5. The morning of the hearing arrived with the kind of cold, colorless sky New York does so well in late March, the sort that makes every building look more honest than it wants to be. I dressed in a navy wool dress I had owned for years and never loved, pinned my hair back, and stood for 1 second too long in front of the mirror of the apartment I had rented in White Plains 2 weeks earlier. It was smaller than the house in Westport, by a measure that would have once embarrassed me. The kitchen had room for one person to cook if she turned carefully. The windows looked out over a parking lot and a strip of bare trees. There was no sweeping staircase, no oversized island, no curated perfection. Just clean counters, one lamp by the sofa, Noah's folders stacked at one end of the table, and the first sketchbook I had bought for myself in years lying beside them. For the first time in months, nothing in the room was pretending to be more than it was. Noah met me by the door with his backpack over one shoulder. "You want me to come?" I looked at him. He had grown into a quieter version of himself over the past few weeks, less reactive, more watchful, older somehow. "You don't have to." "I know." That was his way of saying yes. Renee was already waiting outside the courthouse when we arrived. She wore charcoal gray, carried a leather folder under one arm, and looked as calm as if she were walking into a dentist appointment instead of a room where someone's entire self-image was about to come apart in public records. "You both slept?" she asked. "No," Noah said. "Good," she replied. "That usually means you understand the stakes." Inside the courtroom felt exactly how it should have felt. Fluorescent, unsentimental, built for paperwork and consequence. Judge Helen Barlow sat high enough above all of us to make it clear she was not there to witness catharsis. She was there to confirm process. Bennett was already at the table with Douglas Pritchard's clean-shaven expensive suit, silver watch face composed into the expression of a man closing a manageable deal. His mother sat behind him in a camel coat posture, perfect gloved hands folded over her purse, as if she had come to observe an unpleasant but necessary family matter. Madison was not in the room, but I could feel her just outside the edges of it, waiting somewhere in the hallway or on the front steps for the future she thought had already been reserved in her name. Judge Barlow reviewed the file, then looked at each of us in turn. "You are both represented by counsel." "Yes, Your Honor," Douglas said. "Yes, Your Honor," Renee said. She looked at me first. "Mrs. Cole, have you had adequate time to review the terms of this agreement with your attorney?" "Yes." "Do you understand those terms?" "Yes." "Are you entering into this voluntarily?" "Yes." She turned to Bennett. "Mr. Cole." He straightened. "Yes, Your Honor." I watched him answer each question the way men like him answer everything, with just enough confidence to imply the process itself was beneath them. Douglas began outlining the settlement in clean, measured language. Residence, business interests, vehicles, distribution of certain accounts, educational provisions. It all sounded so bloodless on paper. A marriage distilled into nouns. Bennett grew visibly impatient by the second page. He wanted the performance of closure, not the reading of its terms. Then Douglas reached the schedules attached to the assets Bennett had insisted on keeping. The house, the development interests, the liabilities tied to specific properties, and personal guarantees attached to certain business obligations. He slowed almost imperceptibly. I saw it before Bennett did. Douglas's eyes moved over the pages again, not because he had never seen them, but because the shape of what he had warned about was now sitting in final form in front of a judge. He leaned toward Bennett and said something too low for anyone else to hear. Bennett frowned. "What?" Douglas said it again, still low. Bennett looked down, irritation first, then concentration, then something uglier as comprehension began to catch up with ego. He turned a page, then another. His hand actually stopped moving. I sat very still. The house was there. The company interests were there. The vehicles and obligations associated with them were there. So were the existing debts, the attached liabilities, the guarantees he had signed years earlier, with the kind of swagger only possible in men who think future money is the same thing as current wealth. Nothing new had been created. Nothing had been slipped in by magic. This was the architecture of the life he had already built, only written down where it could not flatter him. He looked at Douglas again, harder this time. "This is wrong." Douglas kept his voice even. "It is not wrong." Bennett's face lost color by degrees. No, that's not what this means." Judge Barlow looked up. "Mr. Cole, is there a problem?" Douglas rose slightly in his seat. "Your Honor, I believe my client is reviewing the allocation schedule." "The same schedule attached to the agreement before the court." "Yes, Your Honor." Bennett finally spoke at full volume, though he was still trying to keep the panic under control. "There are liabilities in here that should have been separated." Renee did not move. Judge Barlow folded her hands. "Separated on what basis, Mr. Cole?" He turned toward me, then not the judge, not his lawyer. Me. "You knew." There it was, that reflexive male outrage, not at the debt, not at the risk, at the possibility that I had understood the paperwork he never thought I was capable of reading. I met his stare. I read what I sign. That landed harder than if I had shouted. Douglas cleared his throat. Your Honor, for the record, I did recommend a fuller review of obligations tied to the real property and business holdings before execution. Judge Barlow's eyes shifted to Bennett. You were advised to seek further review. Bennett looked trapped for the first time in our marriage. I was told it was unnecessary. Douglas did not rescue him. I advised caution. Judge Barlow glanced at the signed acknowledgment in the file. You were represented by counsel. You were advised. You had time to review. Are any of these liabilities newly created after negotiation? Douglas answered first. No, Your Honor. Are they attached to the assets and interests Mr. Cole insisted on retaining under this agreement? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Barlow looked at Bennett the way only a good judge can, with complete indifference to his self-image. Then this court is not looking at deception. It is looking at an adult litigant who declined to fully examine what he was asking to keep. Bennett sat back like the air had gone thin. For one strange second, I almost pitied him. Not because he did not deserve what was happening, he did, but because I had spent 15 years watching him build himself around the illusion that he could charm gravity into making exceptions for him. Men like that do not simply lose money, they lose the story that money was telling on their behalf. By the time we stepped out into the hallway, Madison was gone. I knew because Bennett checked his phone twice before we even reached the elevator. Once with disbelief, once with the cold, fast anger of a man realizing he had mistaken admiration for loyalty. He called her name into the silence of a voicemail and got nothing back but his own clipped breathing. Evelyn found Noah near the courthouse doors before I did. Your father is under a lot of pressure, she was saying, one manicured hand hovering near his arm. Families do not turn on each other in difficult seasons. Noah looked at her with a steadiness that made him seem older than 17. I didn't turn on him, he said. I just stopped pretending he was telling the truth. Her mouth parted slightly. For the first time since I had known her, she looked like a woman who had said the wrong thing to the wrong generation. That was her punishment. Not public humiliation. Irrelevance. Naomi called that evening. I let it ring twice before I answered. Eliza, I swear to God I didn't know it was that bad. I said nothing. I thought he was just trying to move on. I thought you were done. I was trying to help keep things calm. Still nothing. Her voice thinned. Please say something. There are some betrayals that deserve a speech. Hers did not. Her punishment was smaller and cleaner than that. Access revoked. Intimacy denied. The door she had used to step into my private life simply no longer existed. I ended the call and blocked her number before she could breathe again. Noah came over to the apartment the following Sunday with a duffel bag and a stack of school papers. He stood in the center of the small kitchen for a moment, taking in the narrow counters, the thrifted stool by the window, the absence of performance. It's quiet here, he said. It is. He set his things down and leaned one hip against the table. How long had you known? I looked at him then, at the folder in his hand, then back again. Long enough to be careful, not early enough to stop all of it. He nodded slowly. I kept thinking you weren't saying anything because you didn't have anything to say. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat. Noah, when people like your father lie for long enough, they count on everyone else getting tired before the truth is organized. He looked down at his hands. I'm sorry. It was the first apology anyone had offered me that did not feel like a strategy. I reached across the table and covered one of his hands with mine. I know. That was enough. More than enough. Bennett did not come to the apartment until nearly 3 weeks later. I opened the door and found him standing there in an overcoat that probably cost more than my first month's rent, though it hung on him differently now. Less like armor, more like a costume he no longer fully believed in. "I just need 5 minutes," he said. "No." He looked genuinely stunned. "Eliza." I kept one hand on the door. "What do you want?" His eyes moved past me, taking in the little dining table, Noah's laptop open on one side, a fan of paint chips and fabric swatches on the other. He saw the life in there and, true to form, assessed it as a resource before he ever recognized it as mine. "There may be ways to restructure some things. If you would just talk to Noah, if you'd stop making this so hostile." I almost laughed. "Hostile? You know what I mean?" "No," I said. "What I know is that you still think I'm part of the infrastructure you can call when the building starts sinking." His jaw tightened. "You let me sign that." I held his gaze. "You started losing everything the day you decided I wasn't smart enough to see what you were doing." That was the nearest thing to a victory speech he was ever going to get from me. I closed the door before he could answer. That night the apartment was quiet in a way my old house had never been, not because there was no sound. Noah was at the table muttering at his essay draft. A kettle clicked on in the kitchen. Someone in the hall laughed on their way to another apartment. It was quiet because nothing in the room was lying. I sat with my sketchbook open, a pencil in one hand, a spread of fabric samples under the lamp. Earlier that week, a woman named Veronica Lane, an interior designer I had met through an old contact from my grandmother's shop, had looked at a few of my notes and said I had an eye for balance and warmth that could not be taught. I had carried that sentence home like a small lit thing cupped against the wind. Noah looked up from his laptop. "What do you think of Michigan?" I smiled. "I think if you still want it, we'll figure it out." He nodded, satisfied by we, in a way that made my throat tighten. Outside the parking lot, lights came on one by one. Inside the lamp by the sofa, cast a pool of amber over the table my pencil. His college forms the life that remained after the performance ended. For years, silence had been the thing I used to survive. Now it was something else entirely. Not suppression, not fear, just peace. If you made it all the way here, tell me in the comments what part of this story hit you hardest. Then stay with me for the next one, because some endings do not just look like revenge. Sometimes they look like a quiet room, a locked door, and the first honest breath you have taken in years.